Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Explore at Home, the Great Exhibition Road Festival's online event series. My name is James Romero. I'm from Imperial College London, who are one of the festival partners, and I will be your host for this lunchtime discussion. Throughout Explore at Home, we've been uncovering projects and stories and individuals from across Exhibition Road that span the worlds of art and science, nature, technology, innovation, cultural heritage, and I think we're going to touch on a couple of those at least today, because we're going to be looking inside one of London's newest museums to find out there's more to music than meets the ear. From never seen before Mozart manuscripts to the earliest guitar and oldest stringed keyboard, the Royal College of Music Museum, which opened to the public just last month, offers a space that celebrates musical creativity and craftsmanship. To discuss these objects and give us a taster of what else can be found inside this latest public attraction on Exhibition Road, we're delighted to be joined by the museum's curator, Professor Gabriele Rossi Rognoni. Thanks so much for joining us, Gabriele.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and hello and good afternoon to everyone.
Yeah, Gabriele is joining us live from the Royal College of Music. So you may be able to hear in the background a flautist or some of the students or musicians practicing in the background. But so far, certainly in the rehearsals and just before we went live, it all sounded very pleasant. So hopefully it will be a nice accompaniment to this conversation. During our chat with Gabriele, we'll be picking out some of the collection highlights and explaining how the museum is working to help schools and families, as well as people with dementia, autism, and other disabilities, I guess appreciate music in a whole new way. Just before we get started, I would like to remind everyone who's watching us that it is an interactive discussion today, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions. Just write them us in the YouTube chat, which I think is either below or just to the right of our live feed here. And your comments will be passed on to me and I'll put them to Gabriele and we can discuss them. Please do be considerate when posting in the chat. We want to create a nice, warm, welcoming, friendly atmosphere and everyone to enjoy this discussion that we're going to go on today. So I guess if that's all understood, we can get started. And I wanted to get started, Gabriele, just finding out a little bit more about yourself before we talk about the museum. You've described yourself as a specialist in redesigning music museums. I wondered if you can tell us something about some of the places you've worked and and what that actually means in terms of a job description.
Sure. It is a very unusual job. Well, redesigning museums is not so unusual, but redesigning music museum was something that almost no one else was doing 25 years ago when I started. And I started with designing and developing the concept and the idea for the Medici collection of musical instruments in Florence at the Galleria dell'Accademia. The Galleria dell'Accademia is famous for Michelangelo's David and Michelangelo's statues, and they had just acquired, transferred from another institution, the beautiful collection that had belonged to the Medici in the Renaissance, which contains the only Stradivari instrument in original conditions, the earliest instrument made by the inventor of the piano. And we had to design an entire new space that spoke to the existing famous museum, but also added a special dimension to it. And it was such an amazing adventure to go through that redevelopment, which is still there and available today, that it grew into a profession and a specialty, and it developed through several other projects. I designed the Museum of the Violin in Cremona in collaboration with some colleagues there.
Yeah, I think we've got a picture of that. So yeah, it's a really impressive looking hall that we've got here.
The most spectacular room. This is the largest collection of incredible violins and cellos made in Cremona during the golden age of violin making that survives in the world. And this was opened about 10 years ago now. And from that, we moved on designing the Paganini Museum in Genova, which also includes the violin that belonged to Paganini himself, a famous Guarneri del Gesù. And then things developed further internationally. So I was for some time a fellow at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, sometime in Berlin, sometime in Paris, and then finally moved here to London when the college decided to demolish and redesign from scratch its amazing museum.
Brilliant. Yeah, it is. You can see why. Maybe is a bit of a niche profession, but you can see that there'll be demand for it in some really some quite beautiful places around the world, which is quite nice for you. You get to sort of travel to all these different beautiful cities and towns. I
Yeah,
wondered,
sorry.
in terms of sort of the history of music and telling that story, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why that particularly sort of exciting intrigues you. Is there an appreciation of instruments or the craftsmanship of making music? Does that sort of enrich the experience of listening to it for you?
It's the entire thing that really excites me because what I always loved of music since I was a child is that it is much more immediate than words to convey feelings, ideas. It is an immediate way of communicating. And because of this, music has accompanied humankind since the very beginning. There are lots of anthropological and linguistic theories that suggest that music and singing might have come before language and speaking in the development of humankind. But of course, apart from the last 150 years, we don't have recordings, we don't have ways of listening to what this music sounded like. And in order to understand it, you have various sources. Sure, you have printed music, you have scores, but scores only tell us a tiny fraction of what music has been in the human experience throughout centuries. What really tell us a lot of music making are musical objects. And musical objects are all sorts of things, are musical instruments, are musical paintings, are toys that were used to make music, are little jewels and pendants and decorations that had also had a musical function, are all the tools that the musician or anyone making music needs in order to perform, or the space where performance happens. So looking at musical objects, you really follow a history of humankind in a very intimate dimension that went across age, gender, social bubbles, formal and informal contexts. More than I've tried to articulate this several times in my profession. More than I believe any other tool, because even when you think, apart from clothes probably, but if you look at cooking and kitchenware and food, this was mostly the domain of women. If you look at hunting tools, this is mostly the domain of men. There aren't many tools that have been part of the human experience so across everything for such a long, uninterrupted time, which means that through musical objects we can really look at humankind. And this is not only about the past, it is very much about our days today. How many studies have been published over the past year and a half of about the importance of music and musical objects during the COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
to just keep going on so many levels, private and social, people out chanting in the street, as well as making music online.
I certainly
This is
think,
what
yeah. I
really
mean,
fascinates me,
the
and what I try to express and explore through the museum displays that I design.
I mean, it's such a rich story. The sort of the interaction between humanity and music and its importance to our daily lives. Like the notations on paper is only, it only gives a fraction of the. You're only a fraction of the way to exploring that full story. And it makes sense to sort of combine those with objects and pieces and instruments and all the other things that sort of at least give you a sense of how important music was to people throughout the ages and what it might have been like to experience it. So, the benefit for you've had in the museum is you're able to draw on this sort of vast collection that the Royal College of Music has. I think you said, is it 15,000 pieces within the collection altogether? I wondered how has a Royal College of Music, which I guess most people would think of as a place of teaching and learning and practicing and developing musicians, how did it come to acquire this sort of collection of historical pieces?
In fact, the collection manages a collection. The college manages a collection that is much larger than 15,000 pieces. 15,000 is only the number of items managed by the museum. But we also have a wonderful library, which is one of the main music libraries in the country. And the college was founded in the second half of the 19th century, when this entire area was redeveloped as a hub for the arts and culture. The V&A was established, Imperial College, Natural History Museum, and the college was built and launched as a new chapter in the history of British music, to bring music education in Britain to the level that was leading at the time and was being taught in Paris, in Vienna, in Berlin, in Brussels. These were the main conservatoires at the time. Around those years, there was also a new sensitivity towards music history, and the concept developed that in order to progress music, we had to become more aware of the past. And so main conservatoires all formed the first important music collection, public music collections. Music museums are a relatively recent chapter of cultural heritage. So those were the years, 1880s, 1890s, when all the main collections were being formed. And so when the college was formed, the library received two large donations of pre-existing libraries from institutions that had been discontinued but had been active and in fact key in the London music scene since the 1750s until the mid-19th century. One of the two libraries was donated by Queen Victoria herself, and another by a group of subscribers and patrons. The museum received a first donation from an Indian Raja, who in fact offered it to Imperial College first. And Imperial College, sorry, yes, Imperial College came back saying, we don't quite do music, but you can. They redirected him to the Royal College of Music, and that's where everything started. And then Sir George Donaldson, a wealthy collector and art dealer, antique dealer at the time, donated his entire collection to the college. And this collection included some incredible pieces. It included the autograph manuscript of Mozart piano concerto in C minor, which is still part of our library. It included the earliest guitar in the world, which we will see later, the earliest keyboard instrument with strings, because these objects were available on the market at the time when collecting music and musical objects was not yet a large fashion. So there was much more offer of incredible things than request. And with enough money and the right connections, with which he certainly had, it was possible in a relatively short period, about 20, 30 years, to assemble one of the most astounding collections that one could
Amazing.
imagine.
I can't believe that some of it was offered to us at Imperial and we turned it down. But at least we kept it. At least we pointed in your direction down the road at the Royal College of Music, and it stayed in the local area. We've had some nice comments that I'm going to read out from people. So we had one from someone called Read and Write, who wrote, "Clothes and music as universal experience. Love it." So someone really liked that comment that you made there, Gabriele. And a comment from Amy Tang, who said, "Music is powerful because it can create shared memories across culture, age, gender, language, even for those who don't play any instruments or read any music." I think, well, I'd certainly agree with that. That sounds, yeah, it's a really beautiful way of putting it, Amy. So we've got this chronologically where we were in the story. We've got this large collection which has been amassed at the Royal College of Music, and there was a museum housed at the RCM since the 70s, but was closed around. I think that was closed down around 7 years ago with the idea of rejuvenating the space. So I wondered if you could sort of in the museum age of this collection, what were sort of the ambitions for the museum when you arrived at the Royal College of Music during this period of it being closed down? I wonder if you could sort of tell us the story of this latest project that sort of manifested in this grand reopening last month.
Yeah. So the college was aware of the importance of the collections, and in fact, in 1971, thanks to the efforts of my predecessor Elizabeth Wells, a purpose-built gallery was created in one of the two courtyards of the college. It was long and narrow because at the time they wanted to allow space for a cricket pitch to be built alongside it. But they did build a purpose-built gallery which was climate controlled. It had light control. It was high security, but everything had been designed in view of what a university museum was in the 1970s, over 40 years ago. It was mostly for student use. It was very hard to reach. It was not accessible. The environmental impact was huge. The amount of energy required to keep it warm and cool during the various seasons was incalculable. And when I joined, there was a sign outside the door saying access forbidden to children under the age of 7 for security reasons, because there were stairs and the glass was not security. So the college was aware that there was great potential in the collection, great potential in the institution, but this potential was impossible to actually exploit as much as it could with the building that we had. And this was the moment when I decided to move to London and join the college, because I had just finished with the Museum of the Violin in Cremona. I was ready for the next big challenge, and the contrast between what could be done and what was here was so big that I couldn't resist the temptation. We undertook a first couple of years of test studies, engaging with the community, engaging with existing visitors and with potential visitors. You have a slide of what the museum looked like in
Yes.
the 1970s.
Yeah, so if you want, you tell us. I think this is from the 70s. Is that right?
And from the 70s, this was amazing. It was a small space that was still able to cram over 1,000 musical instruments in the space available. So highly interested visitors could really go through the history of the flute or through the history of the clarinet, through almost 111 flutes, all on display next to each other. But the idea of what a museum is has changed so much. Today we focus on stories, we focus on individual connection to single items, we focus on the emotions that can be raised through these objects. And this display didn't quite enable us to do this. So we tried to work with a contemporary artist, Hugo Dalton, and he very generously donated a large work of wall art, which he created and designed for the museum.
Is this these pictures here?
And this was an emotional moment to start thinking of our museum as something different, something that could bring in more energy, new enthusiasm, new donors and funders, because money was a big challenge at that point. And we could start re-looking at our collections with a different eye. And through the eye of our visitors, more than through the eyes of, or not exclusively, through the eye of the specialist who is very keen on the technical details of each individual item. This worked out because we gave a short presentation at the conference at the Wellcome Trust, and the Heritage Lottery Fund, or now the National Lottery Heritage Fund, was attending the conference and approached us to say, what a wonderful project, can we be involved? And we started working together, and our ambitions at that point grew immensely, because it wasn't only ourselves and the college being aware of the quality of what we had, but it was clear that there was a broader and external support and investment in what we could do. And this became the starting point of a major redevelopment of the east wing of the college, a £40 million redevelopment, which has been launched very recently, these past few months, which involved redeveloping the entire courtyard, digging down 8 meters, building 2 new concert halls, a new cafe, new entrance for the college, all aiming to open up to visitors. The entrance of the college was a bit in very Victorian style, a bit daunting. You didn't feel like you were welcome in unless you were a student. Well, what we wanted to do was to open up the community. We have over 400 concerts, public concerts every year, opera productions, and now the museum, which includes a permanent display, temporary exhibition spaces, performance spaces, education spaces, and the research center. So we really try to open to the variety of reasons why people might want to get involved and interested in what we do.
Yeah, I can really see from that first picture in the 70s. I'll go back to it. So it's obviously immediately it's quite impactful. Like you can see all this stuff. Like you can imagine walking into that room and just being like, whoa, blown away by the sort of this busy environment of just the music instruments packed into every single sort of nook and cranny. But I can also 100% see in terms of storytelling or narrative or like you have to do a lot of work there as the visitor yourself to sort of extract sort of any sort of meaning or stories associated with all those pieces. Whereas you can definitely see with, you know, it's more of a, as you said, like what a museum is supposed to be. Like there's more of a guide guiding people through the space, bringing these stories out rather than just cramming as many instruments into a space as you can. I can definitely see that change. I am slightly annoyed that there wasn't a cricket pitch. Those plans were scuppered. As a cricket fan, that annoys me, but because that would be really handy to have that right next to Imperial College. But I'll forgive you for that part. We had a couple of nice comments from someone replying to Amy's comment, I think, who said shares saying that commenting that Amy's comment was so true, and she learned and they learned some Sanskrit chants to make them feel more connected to a tradition. Sorry, that goes back thousands of years. Oh, what a lovely thing to commit to. I don't know if there's one of those lockdown projects that you set yourself, but what a lovely thing to do. In terms of, I think what we'd like to go on to now is to enter into the museum, or at least virtually, or in our imaginations anyway. And you've got the museum that's open now. You from that sort of 15,000 collection, you've got 60 objects that you've chosen to put on initially anyway to put on display, and they're arranged in these three sections. So you've got music is creation, music is craft, and music is performance. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what you are hoping to convey in each of those areas, and maybe give us an object from each of those sections that really sort of encapsulates that story.
Of course, choosing 60 objects out of 15,000 is a huge challenge. And it is a lot of what being a curator is about. It's making difficult choices and trying to come up with a narrative that is as inclusive, as relevant to the collection, so as relevant to your potential visitors as possible, as relevant to your collections as possible, as relevant to the institution as possible. So what I wanted to try and bring out from these 15,000 objects was not so much a walk through the history of music, which we could have done because our collections cover more than 600 years of music making. So we could have quickly gone through 600 years of making music in London. But the college is not about the history, or is not only about the history of music. It's not only about our musical heritage. It is about making music, and it is about the experience of music, making excellent music today. And it is about making the music of the future, because of course we have vast composition departments and composition for screen, composition for video games, a jazz orchestra. It is very much about where music is going and why music is relevant. And this is the reason of this interpretation choice that goes through the key three moments of music creativity and creativity in general. You have a moment when you spark a new idea. A new idea pops up. And it's never a single idea. It's usually an idea that derives from the intersection between different causes. In order to have a spark, in order to have fire, you need wood, you need something that creates the spark, and you need air. So this is what happens with music. You have a first idea that usually comes from a new technology being introduced, or new materials being available, or a new craft being imported from another culture. All these things come, or a new need from society to make music in a new way. All these things come together and generate a new musical instrument, for example, and the new repertoire that comes from that musical instrument, and the new way and context to make music. This is music is creation. Music is a new spark. But then there is a second moment when this spark needs to develop into a fire. A tradition derives many of these sparks don't go anywhere. Many of them just disappear. A few catch up as fire and transform into a proper tradition and craft. And this is what we explore in the second area through music making. But the second area is also an excuse to bring out some of the most spectacular instruments and objects from our collections. We have objects made with precious materials, objects where artists collaborated in creating unique pieces of art, sometimes 500-600 years old, which we really wanted to show. And then there is the moment when this craft leads to a piece that is shared and can be shared in a performance, and the performance can be so many different things. Performance is also a lot of what the college is about. So in the third area, music is performance, we wanted to share how the experience of performing can take many different shapes for the performer. It can be a performance for yourself, or for a group of people for the enjoyment of the group, or for an audience, or can be music making at home. But that space is also a flexible space where we have performances. We have students performing almost all the time. We have concerts, but it is also a highly technological space wired for live electronic performances, performances of video and screen and sound art. Because what we want to convey here is the fact that our collections are not only about the past, but also about inspiring the future. We will have a composition festival where composers will compose new music inspired by our heritage, and we already acquired some pieces of video art that are a new stream of collecting for our collections. You have some of the objects.
Yeah, I was going to say let's see some of the pieces which correspond to those three sections. So this is the example from the museum is music is creation section. So let's have a look at this. So what are we looking at here?
What we have here is the oldest guitar in existence. It is an incredible piece, 1581, made in Portugal by a maker, Belchior Dias, of whom we know very little. This is an instrument that can be is a starting point, but is also a milestone. It's a monument for so many reasons. Of course, we can play it. It is an instrument that is potentially in playing condition. Many copies of this instrument exist, so we know the sound of this instrument relatively well. It is also an instrument that tells us how musical objects often had long lives and represent the long lives that they went through. This instrument was certainly well played until the 1790s, beginning of the 19th century, because the soundboard is not original and was replaced at the beginning of the 18th century. So when we say it's not original, even the replaced part is about 300 years old.
Yeah, but an instrument should be made to be played, right? I think it's got a richer history for the fact that some bits of it had to be replaced because it was played so much. I think that,
of course,
that's nice. So let's look at the second object. If that's
hold on, this instrument is exceptional also because it was exceptional at the time because it was made for the Medici family. And it is the best representation of the power of Lisbon and Portugal at the time. The wood comes from South America, the ivory comes from Africa. It is the best piece of workmanship that Lisbon could produce at the time, and therefore represents really the peak of a tradition. Yes, let's move to the second one.
Yeah. So the second piece is the beautiful-looking harpsichord.
And this is a piece that in the music is craft section conveys the different roles and people who work to make the musical event possible. It is a harpsichord made in 1531. It is one of the oldest harpsichords in existence, made in Venice, clearly to furnish a public hall, a reception hall in a private palace. But what you see here is the combination of the artwork of the musical instrument maker. It's a beautiful Italian instrument, but also of the painter. The painting was added in the 1560s, about 30 years after the instrument had been made. It's based on a painting by Titian at a time when everyone in Venice was imitating Titian. It really gives you the flavor of what furnishing a noble palace in Venice might have been at the peak of the luxury of that city.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful piece. Now, the third object for the music is performance section isn't an instrument, but it's a painting. So, yeah, what are we looking at with this one?
This is a very famous painting, to the point that some time ago we were asked by a company that produces socks to have it printed on their Christmas socks.
Socks, you say?
Yes.
Okay.
It's as famous as it is in the music world. It is a portrait of Joseph Haydn, which was painted when Haydn came to London in 1791. And it's an interesting moment in the history of performance, because Haydn was attracted to London as a celebrity to largely to revive the financial difficulties of Johann Salomon, the impresario who called him here, and he was a big stunt for John Bland, the publisher who published his music and hosted him. They were good friends. Bland had gone and visited Haydn in Austria, and Haydn spent his first night at his house when he came over. So the publisher, John Bland, commissioned this painting as an advertisement to be displayed in his shop and then reproduced through hundreds of engravings, which were distributed as leaflets. And the engravings survive in many collections around the world. So this is really the beginning of music advertising.
Oh, right.
And of promoting the commercial potential of music and of celebrity.
Brilliant. There's two objects that I'd like to come on to now, because I think they have a particularly interesting story. I'm going to bring them up on screen now. I'll bring up the first one here, or the instrument anyway. So this is I believe a cittern. It's a kind of Renaissance era guitar, I understand, and it's accompanied in the museum by an 18th century painting of I don't think she's known, an unknown artistic woman holding that very instrument. I wonder if you could. That sounds very rare, or that doesn't happen very often. I wondered if you could tell us how you came to take ownership of these two pieces. I'll flip between them as you're referencing them, and I guess what makes this combination so rare and exciting.
Yes, redeveloping museums is always a great opportunity to go through the collections and discover new things. We had a brilliant conservator working with us, Susanna Caldera, and another colleague, Richard Martin, who digitized and led the digitization campaign of over 10,000 objects. And the combination of these two dimensions was vital to come to some discoveries that we hadn't quite envisaged. When the citrinchen, the instrument, was can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. When this instrument was acquired, it was part of the original collection, so it arrived at the college in the 1890s. It was very dirty. It was covered in a rather thick black layer, which made it very hard to read. We knew it was an important instrument. It's an instrument made by the Stradivari of plucked instruments, Joachim Thielke, who worked in Hamburg at the end of the 18th century. It wasn't very well known until our conservator cleaned it, and the instrument was digitized, some photographs were taken, and they circulated a bit more widely through social media and through the website of the museum. And at that point, I received a telephone call from a friend and collector who lives in a castle in France, who said, I'd like to invite you out for lunch. Do you have time? I have something to show you. Sure. He came driving his Rolls Royce from the 1970s, cream colored, beautiful car. And on the back seat, wrapped up in blankets, was the painting, which is a painting from the 1790s, so painted about 100 years after the instrument had been made, and which represents this specific instrument. We know it is this specific one and not a similar one because this maker only made unique pieces. We have about 200 instruments surviving by him, and they are all very different from each other. So it is identifiable as the same musical instrument, which 100 years later was still clearly such a status symbol that this lady decided to have her official portrait. This is a large size standard official portrait of the time attributed to Johannes Tischbein. She chose to have her portrait painted with this instrument, which by that time was possibly not being played much anymore because it is an instrument that has a short musical history. It would be surprising if she still played it. So maybe by then it had become a decorative status symbol in its own right. But it's hard to tell because we don't quite know who she is yet, and we hope to find out.
Wow, what an amazing story! And yeah, it's very useful to have friends in French castles who drive 1970s Rolls Royces who can tell you that your picture features in a painting that he has. It's very useful from a curatorial perspective.
And then it is very useful to have the support of the Art Fund and the V&A Purchase Grant and several donors who came together to support the acquisition, because this is something that is really vital and often overlooked in the life of museums.
Absolutely. I'm glad they came together and allowed you to tell this story within the museum. I think that's really lovely. We had a question from Simon Davis. He just wanted to ask about the harpsichord. He said it's difficult to get an idea of scale. I'll go back to the harpsichord image. So, do you have an idea? Can you give a sense of what sort of size this is? It could be like a miniature one, but I assume it's not.
It's about 1.80 m, almost 2 meters long, and about 80 centimeters wide.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for that. And we had a question from Valda who asked if you have a single favorite object in the collection. We don't have images of all the objects, so I don't know if it's one we've already featured, but if there's another one, you feel free to describe it in as much detail as you can.
It's always very, very hard. I often get this question and I haven't found the right answer yet because I'm very whimsical in my tastes and I tend to change from time to time. Every instrument has so many stories to tell, and usually my favorite is the one that I am working on at a specific time. Right now, we are working on what is considered to be the oldest keyboard instrument with strings surviving in the world, dating to the 1450s. And it is a rather strong story that suggests that it might be from the 1450s. By now, science has progressed so much that we are able to work with carbon-14 dating, with DNA research on the provenance of the wood. We can find out a lot from the materials of the object and about its musical history. So this is our current research project. And right now, this is my favorite instrument because it's an instrument that has been overstudied for 150 years and even now keeps telling us new stories and new ideas that we hadn't realized before.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. There's another part of the museum I wanted to bring you on to. So upstairs in the museum on this virtual tour, you have a space which I guess firmly roots the collection in the local area to an extent. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the community of musicians that lived in Kensington during the sort of last quarter of the 1800s and into the 20th century. We've got a picture of the space here. So it'd be lovely to talk about that part of the museum.
This is a space that I was very keen on when we designed the new spaces because it is a flexible space for temporary exhibitions. And temporary exhibitions are very much what keep a museum alive and enables us to connect with what is relevant from time to time. with the permanent display, you choose a story, and that story remains more or less the core, the backbone of your museum and narrative. But with contemporary exhibition, you can keep exploring and connecting. So our first one relates to a very special moment at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, when the Pre-Raphaelite community largely lived and gathered around the Royal College of Music. They are two important stories that had not been told together before, and we had a wonderful collaborator, Anna Maria Barri, who is a specialist in this area, and started very practically, as it happens in these cases, realizing how many of these artists were living in houses that were all located next to each other and all in the South Kensington space. And they were painters, they were poets, they were musicians. Many of them were professors at the college and directors at the college. And then we started realizing how many of the events that they organized collaboratively happened and were hosted and were promoted by the Royal College of Music, and how many of the paintings were portraying musicians while they were performing, and how many of the vocal music was based on poetry that had been written by largely neighbors. And this makes you look at a well-known period in our cultural history, the Pre-Raphaelites, in a very different and much more human way, and makes you realize the importance of human connection, apart from beautiful works of art that we look at in museums. It is the human collection, the connection, it's the human collaboration that results in some of the masterpieces of our culture. This is very much what we wanted to revive through this exhibition. This is exactly what we want from this museum. And this temporary exhibition space will be a chance to connect with communities, with musical traditions that exist in London and are not usually at center stage in performance halls, in concert halls, and in museums. It is really a space to look outside and bring in what is happening out there.
Yeah, it's a really lovely story to tell of our sort of the history of the local area and the importance of it within sort of a musical context. But you have mentioned that the museum is not just sort of reflections on the past; it's still telling stories that are incredibly relevant to music composition today. I wondered about that theme of instrumentation and innovation in terms of searching for new sounds, and that itself being a sort of source of inspiration for composers and writers and producers. Do you feel that's as relevant as ever in the sort of modern digital age of making music as it was in when you look back at sort of the development of music through time, through history?
It's incredibly relevant. Over the past 3 years, we developed a collaboration with makers and inventors of musical instruments today. And one of the showcases that we have is dedicated to a project that we are running, a knowledge exchange project, which brings in musical instruments that have been developed over the past 5 years. And we not only display them, but we lend them to our composers and to our musicians, who keep them for 3-4 months, and at the end of the experience come back and share with the makers and with our audiences their musical experience. Because one of the challenges that makers face today is the difficulty to connect with the professional musicians. Most of the new musical instruments that are being developed are for amateur players, but the relationship is still the same. It is a 19th century construction that led us to believe that new music comes from the genius of a genius composer. But you can't imagine Beethoven composing for the piano without a piano being there before. And in fact, we know and we follow how Beethoven's style in composing for the piano changes at times when we know through the biography that he receives new specific pianos. And you can trace hypothetical but convincing parallels between his new experiencing a new instrument and something new happening in his music.
Mm.
It is always an interaction. This should not suggest that all composers are just accountants reflecting the genius of the musical instrument maker. That would be the opposite of the spectrum. But music derives as a collaborative phenomenon where many more things than just the genius of the composer come together. As soon as you look into the creative process that really led to some of the most famous music pieces that we know today, you realize how much there is an interaction. And when you talk to a musician today, you realize how much the musician is influenced by the instrument that they are playing.
Mm.
And changing instrument leads to a different way of playing. Changing instrument available leads to a different way of composing. So we should look at music as a more multifaceted result of many more people than just the composer and the performer.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I guess there's always, yeah, there's a credit to sort of their ability, the composer or the writer's ability to sort of harness a new sound or a new instrument and use it in a way which they think produces something beautiful or emotive or whatever they're looking for. But yeah, like I said, it's a layered. There's lots of different things there contributing to a final piece of music that sounds innovative or new and fresh or however you want to describe it. And there is that sort of the craftsmanship in the production of new sounds and new approaches to instrumentation, which is definitely part of that. There's a question we had from Andantino, I think is the name. So this is someone who I think they visited the museum in its previous incarnation, and they mentioned that when they visited originally, they were able to sit in on some of the rehearsals and whether that was still a possibility. I thought that might be quite a nice link, as well as answering that question, also quite a nice link to talk a little bit more about the performances that are going to be happening within the museum. It's a live, dynamic place. It's not just a selection of objects. So yeah, I wonder if you maybe answer that question and also talk a little bit about that.
I do. Just give me 1 second. Sorry.
The background music got a little bit too overwhelming and too loud.
Sorry. A lovely bassoon player had moved to the office next door, part of our same office, to practice. So sorry for the sound. Yeah, and this leads very much to the answer to the question. Yes, music happens at the college everywhere. In every space, including the lifts, including the stairways, including any office that is left unattended for 5 minutes, because we have over 800 musicians in the building that are constantly looking for practice spaces and rehearsal spaces. We run a series of more formal performances and concerts in the museum. We are very proud that a substantial number of our instruments from the collections are in playing condition and are kept in playing condition. I have been fighting for many years to maintain the idea that performing and sound are an intrinsic part of the value of historical instrument, of an historical instrument. So we can't only preserve musical instruments in silence. Their performing life is still part of the reason why we preserve them today. So we do keep many of our instruments in playing condition. And we have Friday concerts at lunchtime, 12:30. They are free of charge. They can be booked online through the college website. And you have an image here. But at the same time, we hold in this space classes, and we encourage the students to come and practice, because every time it's happened, the sort of interaction that I see happening spontaneously among visitors and students is amazing. Asking questions, just sitting down and listening and seeing a bit of the behind the scene of what being a professional musician is like, and how rehearsing happens, because there is a lot that happens behind doors before a musician goes on stage and gives a concert. And sometimes it conveys more of the meaning of music and individual meaning of music to listen to practice than to a formal performance.
Brilliant. I wonder, there's another question here from Therese, who's asked about how you're looking to involve people with sort of learning difficulties so that they can appreciate classical music. I wonder if there's a range of outreach programs linked to the museum in terms of reaching all different audiences who might be sort of underrepresented or might not be usually be able to or feel able to visit the space. So I wonder if you could maybe answer Therese's question and also talk about some of the other sort of programs that you're looking to run or are running.
Sure. Accessibility has been the leading word for the entire redevelopment. When you have funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, the first thing that you are told is that you need to work keeping in mind the national lottery players, who are not necessarily museum goers, but can be anyone in the community. And so you start thinking about all the people who might not naturally come to your museum and how to try and involve them. And the way we started doing it was consulting with associations who specialized in the various fields. We partner with an association working with people living with dementia, and organize a number of events where people living with dementia come to the college, and we start from the tactile experience of touching an instrument from the collections. We have many instruments that can be used for this purpose, and exploring how these can bring out emotions and individual memories that help to reconnect somehow and communicate. We are going to launch autism-friendly tours, and the lighting and all the sound systems in the display have been designed in order to support autism-friendly tours of the collection. We partnered with a number of schools, including SEND schools for students with special needs, to develop programs that they could use for their music education and to engage their students when they will come and visit. I say will because due to the COVID restrictions, schools haven't really restarted their school trips, not much yet, and we're going to launch these in a dedicated space starting with the new year, with the beginning of the new year.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And the final question I was just going to put to you, you mentioned sort of tours for people with autism. Wendy asked if the museum is doing, I think these are more general guided tours for groups. Is that something that's going to be offered or is offered?
Yes, we do standard guided tours every Wednesday at 12:30. And they are drop-in guided tours, so people can just show up or can be booked through our website. And otherwise, we do guided tours for groups from at least 6 people, and they can happen at any time.
Brilliant. I think we've been putting in the chat links to the booking pages and to more information on the museum. So yeah, if you haven't seen those, everyone watching, just scroll up and find those links, and you can sort of book on.
And at the same time, we have an audio guide which can be used by visitors free of charge, and our welcome desk invigilators are all highly trained and are always very welcome to give information about the instruments on the objects on display.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that was useful, Wendy. Unfortunately, I think that brings us just about to the end of this sort of lunchtime discussion. Thank you so much, Gabriele, for joining us today. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I've seen in the comments a couple of people are booking their places or are committed now to visiting the museum. So that's great to hear. And hopefully watching this will mean that their visit is even richer as a result of getting a bit of the background to how the project came about. For those who are watching live on YouTube, apologies if we were unable to get to your question or read out your comment. we just ran out of time a little bit. A recording of this discussion will soon appear on the Great Exhibition Road Festival YouTube channel, so you can watch it again, or you can share it with friends or colleagues or whoever you want, really. In fact, all future live events and recorded videos from the festival will be appearing on this YouTube channel. Sorry. So if you do want to get notifications when new events go live or new things to watch go live, if you click the subscribe button, you give us a follow, and you'll get a little notification every time something new pops up. I think the next event we've got coming up is a lovely sort of family festive event coming up on the 8th of December, where you can make your own festive Christmas cards, led by an illustrator who will be joined by an expert from the V&A who's going to be showing us within their collections. They've got some of the very first Victorian Christmas cards, so we're going to use those as inspiration for us all to make our own Christmas cards this year, which I think will be a really, really lovely event. So do sign up for that. And one final point, we have an evaluation form for today's discussion, so there's going to be a link to that posted. So please do take 5 minutes to let us know what you thought about this event, and there's a space for you to suggest other events or new things that we might do in the future, which we would really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts. But yeah, otherwise, I think that's about it from me. Just to say thank you once again, Gabriele, for joining us. I hope it's been enjoyable talking about this project that you've been working on for so long.
It's been very pleasant. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to everyone who raised questions. And we are open every day, including weekends, apart from Mondays. So I hope to meet you in person.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Have a wonderful Friday afternoon. Have a wonderful weekend. That's it from us at the Great Exhibition Road Festival. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.